So as you just heard, my name is Sarah, and I have bipolar disorder. My first episode was 10 years ago when I was 16. I went into a major depression at the beginning of the school year. At first, I felt bored and unchallenged, and then I started to sleep too much. And by Christmas, I was having anxiety attacks on a daily basis, and I just couldn't show up anymore. In January, I officially dropped out of high school. Knowing what I now know about my family history, I now know that I wasn't the first. My grandmother, and by all accounts, her grandmother as well, also had bipolar disorder. My grandma Lila was a big Irish lady. She was a church choir soprano, and I always like to say she had the loudest voice in any choir. She was the opposite of a shrinking violet. She was opinionated and sarcastic, and she was Irish, so she could hold her drinks. I was visiting her one day early in those first few months, and my mother, who is here today, made the mistake of leaving the room for a few moments, and Lila decided that was the moment to speak her true mind. She said I was wasting my parents' money by losing a year of private school. She told me to pull myself together, to pull up my socks. She told me that I was better than my current behavior. And when my mother returned, so did Lila's smile. We never discussed that conversation again. That was my first encounter with stigma. And I can tell you it has stuck with me like none of the others have since. The year that followed that conversation included a stay at an inpatient ward at Sunnybrook Hospital. Surprisingly, for some reason, I was also back at school at that point. So knowing I was about to check into the hospital for I didn't know how long, I went to my English teacher and asked for some work to do. She suggested that I read the same book as everyone else in the class. And next on the syllabus was Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You know, yes, that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson and Nurse Ratched and a suicide and a lobotomy. But the book, I have since learned, does have some redeeming qualities. The opening poem at the first page of the book has a very comforting rhythm that it still sort of runs through my head when I'm really anxious. It goes, one flew east, one flew west, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. I don't know. I don't think the teacher had any idea of the irony of the situation. I don't think she had any idea that this was my first encounter with a blatant lack of empathy. I never forgot this one either. My university career was nowhere near as exciting as that first year. I had an embarrassing haircut, and then I was dating an even more embarrassing boy, so we're just gonna skip over that. The next important moment for tonight's talk was September 15th, 2013, which was the night I wrote my first blog about my bipolar disorder. It was 8 years after the mental institution. I was having a bad night, and I went for a walk. I was walking down the street. You can actually see I live just down the street out this window. I was walking up Yonge Street, and a young woman in the crowd, her t-shirt hit me in the face. It said, one flew east, one flew west. And something fell into place. That night, I told my cuckoo's nest story to the big, scary internet. And I had no idea who or how they would react. It took me 8 years, but I found a silver lining. I told the story of the teacher and the hospital and the pain, but also how funny the situation was. And suddenly I entered a community that I didn't even know existed. My friends, old roommates, classmates, my parents' friends, my aunts, my uncles, their friends, everyone that reached out to me had the same message. And it was either that they struggled or someone that they cared about deeply did too. And I knew from that night that this was going to be my calling. I was going to change people's minds about what it meant to be mentally ill. I was going to change people's minds about what it meant to have a chronic illness that no one can see. And here is where Healthy Minds and Katie came along. It's very similar to Chelsea. I didn't reach out to her, she found me. And for almost 2 years now, my place as a writer on the Healthy Minds Canada website has compelled me to find a silver lining every 2 weeks. Because now I know that people are listening. Everyone who has reached out over the past 2 years, they weren't all under 35, everyone who has liked or shared or tweeted my blog or stopped me in the hallway at work or cornered me at a house party to talk about something I've written, they are listening. Healthy Minds Canada has made me an ambassador for a segment of society that doesn't have a strong voice. And I know that voice can be strong and funny and angry and sad. But for me, above all, it must carry a positive message for my own good as well as my readers. As the old saying goes, everything works out in the end. If it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. And I know that if I can't even find a glimmer of hope in my current situation, then I'm not ready to write about it. For my own sake, maybe even more than for my readers, I have to find meaning in the hardships that the universe has dealt me. And when I sit down once every 2 weeks, it's almost like an outsider giving me a perspective on my own situation. Because I think of my audience. Those are people that don't understand. Explaining to them why my illness makes me stronger is a hell of a lot more helpful than just complaining about the situation. Through their blog series, Healthy Minds Canada is allowing those with lived experience, like myself, to share their voices with a wider community. HMC is growing empathy in people like that teacher. And they're growing community instead of fostering animosity in people like my grandmother. And in me as a writer, whether they know it or not,